We do touch on some heavy topics, and you can always check the description for more details on this episode. The TURTZED Podcast and content in this episode is presented solely for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. Neither I nor my guests are healthcare or mental health care providers, and we are not licensed or authorized to provide professional medical advice. For more information, please see our policy at TURTZED.com.
Today, we welcome Candice to the podcast, a coach based in Miami, and we're going to dive into why Candice decided to become a coach, a little bit more about her coaching practice, and everything in between. Candice, welcome to Turtz.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Well, I'm excited that you're here, and I'm excited to dive in where we begin every podcast at the beginning. So what made you decide to become a coach?
You know, it's interesting. I came to coaching in a different way probably than most people. I had been a marketer for a while, and as a marketer, I saw all different types of people launching different types of offers and services. And I discovered breathwork, and this was something that I thought, oh my gosh, this could help so many people. I went on vacation, and it was a really long flight. And as soon as I landed from this, I felt fine on the flight. As soon as I landed, I just really started feeling very sick. And pretty much the first 5 days out of that 10-day trip, so half the trip, I was really, really sick. And my husband is a doctor. He's an ER doctor, and he realized that it seemed like I had symptoms of an ulcer. So I started taking medicine for an ulcer, but it takes time for that stuff to start working. I was in bed anyway while I wasn't feeling well, and trying to keep my mind occupied. I couldn't really read a book, couldn't focus on that much. So I was doing a lot of audio, a lot of guided meditations. And there were a couple of meditations in the app that I was using that had a breathwork aspect. And I really enjoyed the breathwork aspect. I kept coming back and just doing those couple. So I was intrigued by how much I enjoyed that, and how focused it made me feel, how good it made me feel, as opposed to with regular meditation. I try it, but I don't think I'm very good at it. My mind is all over the place. With breathwork, I had a little bit more something to focus on. So I came back from that trip, and I decided to explore, how can I add this into my life? What does that look like? And then I decided to become a breathwork coach, and then I have added on other certifications from there.
What was it about the breath work that made you want to really dive in and learn more about breathing and getting a certification for it?
So in addition to the fact that it's, what I just mentioned, the focus aspect, and it just made me feel better. And looking into breathing, your breath is actually so important. And many people don't even think about it because you're doing it constantly. You're doing it while you're doing literally everything and anything else in your life. Well, whatever it is that's happening, you're breathing, and you're probably not thinking about it. But if you do think about it, and if you modify it, it can change so much immediately in your body. You think that your mind kind of dictates how you are in your body. It's actually the other way around. You can use your body to dictate what goes on in your mind using your breath, and that's pretty incredible. So just that connection and seeing what an impact breath can have on things. Is breath going to cure your diabetes? No. Is it going to heal your broken leg? No. But it is going to help you with things that can, support healing faster in those items, right? Because it can do things like help lower your heart rate, help with your blood pressure, help with your emotions. That, there's a domino effect from all that other stuff, or I should say to all that other stuff.
What's interesting about the breath work is that there's a mind-body connection, and without really doing a grounding practice where you're going outside and putting your feet in, grass or the dirt or sand or the water, there's an element of it bringing you back to the present, which you had kind of talked about, being in bed and it bringing you present, but also that you weren't able to meditate per se in the traditional way of sort of mind over matter. When you work with clients, what is it about the breath work that they're able to connect with it so quickly and utilize the technique? Is there something specific about it that jumps out to them?
That's a good question. I think it probably is having, again, a specific thing to hook your attention to. And there's also really that sovereignty aspect, I guess, right? The fact that if I right now want to relax, then there are certain techniques that I can do and I can get relaxed very quickly. And then for something that I have after this call, if I need to perk up, then I know that I can spend 5 minutes breathing in a completely different way and I can get there very quickly. And it's just you, right? It's interesting. Like I have all these different apps. I mentioned that I had a meditation app. I've got different breathwork apps. I've got sleepy time apps. They're fun. They're really cool. But I try not to use them all that often because to me, I'd rather just try to fall asleep using my breath. To me, that is like the ultimate, as I had mentioned before, sovereignty, right? It's just your breath. It's this thing that you can control. And sure, some people, I understand, there's breathing conditions, there's breathing problems. It's not, I'm not saying it's not work. I don't want to say it's not work. There is some work involved in doing breath work, but understanding that you have that control, I think, is a light bulb moment for many people.
I use breath work to help calm me down. I will use breath work to help me fall back asleep if I wake up in the middle of the night. But I've never really thought about breath work in terms of giving you energy. And you had mentioned, if you had a call after this that you needed to bring up your energy for, you would utilize breath work. That's very different even for me to hear. I'd be curious if you could elaborate a little bit more on that, because I think most people think of breath work as a way to calm the body, calm the mind, and it's a very different utilization of it and very interesting as well.
It is. And you're right. People do have a very specific idea of what breath work is, but that's really only a partial picture. What breath work technically is at its most base level is the intentional manipulation of your breath to create a desired effect. So it doesn't have to be relaxing per se, or down regulating per se. It's intentionally breathing a certain way in order to create a certain effect that you want to create. So there are breathing techniques that are energizing, and they tend to involve shorter. So relaxing breathing generally has longer, slower exhales. A more energizing breath is going to have a faster exhale, might be more forceful breathing. There are some techniques that are there. There's one that basically I describe it to people like you're panting like a dog, but with your mouth shut. So your tongue's not hanging out, but it's a real rapid, you snap your abs back and forth, and it's just, there are certain techniques that's only one. But a lot of different breaths that you can do that will make you feel energized pretty quickly. And after lunch is always a good time, I think, because all your blood is going into your stomach, digesting, and you're getting tired. And if you don't want another coffee, it's a really nice alternative. So
it's definitely something that I'm going to try, because I think for me, a lot of times, I guess there's an element of breath work to it. If I wake up in the morning, I try to go for a walk, and that sort of brings up the energy, both because my body's moving, but there's a lot of hills where I am right now. So there is definitely some extra breath work in those hills.
No, that's
even on a walk.
And walking is great. You can absolutely use that to meter your pace, your cadence. I mean, yeah, there's a lot you could do with that. That's cool.
So with the breath work and your coaching, I think there's an interesting aspect of creating these tools to help people in their daily life. When you look at the bigger picture of working with clients and coaching people, what specifically are you working with them on in incorporating the breath work?
Typically, when people reach out to me they are more often than not looking for immediate targeted advice. I've got a meeting coming up in a little bit. I'm stressed. What do you suggest? Or I've been feeling this way lately. What do you think? Or I want to do blah, blah, blah routine. Does that work with this? So they tend to have very specific questions. about how to work with the material.
It sounds like a lot of the breath work is geared towards specific instances in someone's life. So, for example, for me, I don't need help toning the energy up. I need help bringing me back down and grounding myself. You're able to utilize the different breathing techniques to help people, whether it is preparing for a meeting, a job interview, a social experience, whatever it may be, to have those tools in their toolbox to be able to utilize their breath as they prepare to go into something that is either making them nervous or they want to be excited for and amped up for, or maybe both, maybe some relaxing, but also pick up the energy. So it sounds more like building the tools around understanding breath so that they can utilize it in their everyday life rather than the longevity of, okay, in this scenario, you do this, in this scenario, you do that. You're really teaching how does breath work.
Yes, that is exactly right. I teach my members and my students that I'm giving them a toolbox. It's things that you wanna that you can pick and choose as it makes sense for you, and that you can use in a lot of different contexts. And I tell people too that you think of breath work, right, as that real relaxing. There's also a whole, I don't know if it's related, but there's a whole school of thought too that it's very there's depth, there's a lot of emotion to it. It can get to be very heavy, and that is absolutely true. But in addition to that, I tell people that I am offering breathwork techniques as band-aids, right? And band-aids are really, really helpful. They keep your cut from getting infected, they keep it clean, they deliver medicine. And these little band-aids really do a whole lot compared to if you didn't have a band-aid. So, what I teach people, like for me, I know that you've spent time in Miami before, and the traffic is obscene and it seems to get worse by the day. I find traffic to be very stressful, and I have found traffic to be probably the number one place outside my home that I do breath work when I'm sitting at certain traffic lights, or if I'm sitting at 95 and traffic is not moving. And so, I teach people that you don't need to sit down the way you might think if you're gonna meditate, or if you're gonna do yoga, if you're gonna do something else. You might think I need to make time on my calendar to do this. I'm telling you, you really don't need to make time on your calendar to do it, because you have these little holes in your calendar anyway, those times in between whenever, that you can, if you start to fit in a little bit of breathing there, you'll notice it will make a difference for you.
And it goes back to what you said in the beginning, where you talked about breathing is something that you do all the time, whether you're aware of it or not. And so utilizing those moments where even now I'm very aware of my breath because we're talking about it. So if I'm holding my breath, I have to remind myself to let go and to keep breathing. That's something that I typically do when I get nervous or when I'm thinking hard about something. I'm distracted from keeping that going. And it almost sounds like there's a muscle memory there, whether it's physically within your body or within your sort of memory and brain, but reminding yourself to keep breathing. And in those moments, staying present, back to the grounding, to be able to utilize your breath, whether it's to de-stress or bring your energy up. But it should almost become something that just becomes natural, because I would imagine with the amount of traffic in Miami, whether you realize it or not, I'm sure your breath starts to change and you can feel that change in your body. So you bring in the counteracting breath to help calm yourself down from the traffic, which I would imagine is sort of the long-term goal, where it just becomes more natural to just change your breath without even fully thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. When I first started learning, the people that I got certified from, I remember the coaches said that the perfect breath, when they're not thinking about anything else, they just are trying to fall into the pattern of a 5-second inhale, a 5-second exhale. And I've since then learned why that's the perfect breath and what's so beneficial about it. And I've learned to do that myself. If I'm not actively thinking about something else, I'm always trying to get into that pattern. But it's tough to train yourself into it initially. It's like the reticular activating system, right? If you decide that you're going to buy a red car, and then you start noticing that there's all these red cars out in the world, right? Like once you start becoming aware of it, you can't not be aware of it. You'll maintain your awareness of it, and and hopefully start to experience the benefits of incorporating it into your life.
With everything that we talked about today, what message do you want to leave people with?
I want people to understand that your breath is a very simple way to change how you feel quickly, physically and emotionally. You can use your breath to change how you feel within minutes. And you need to learn a little bit how to do it, but it is not rocket science. And it is a tool that will serve you for the rest of your life every day.
And I love the idea of it being a Band-Aid and saying that up front, because it is a tool and it's a Band-Aid, but also understanding that there might be more behind getting nervous to go into a job interview or needing to like boost your energy before you go into a job interview. There might be other things connected. So you're giving them tools to get through these difficult moments. And also, it doesn't mean that it stops there. These are just ways that you can continue with your life, progress forward, and also give yourself space to continue to work through other things that might be impacting, nerves, anxiety, excitement, all these other things. They have tools for those moments where they really need them.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. My group program kind of covers some of that other stuff, but you really hit the nail on the head.
What is something that someone has told you that impacted your life and you'll never forget?
When I was in my early 20s and I had my first job, and I was dating this guy that was a little bit older than me. And I told him that I was very excited to be working in this particular building. This was a very glamorous office building for its location at the time. And I said, I remember coming here as a couple times as a kid with my mom and just being completely dazzled by this building and the atrium, especially all the plants and the greenery. And I just thought that I would love to be able to spend more time here. And now I get to work in this building. And my boyfriend said to me, he said, well, sometimes when we realize we want something or when we decide we want something, we set things in motion without even realizing it. And eventually we get them. And that was all he said. It wasn't a particularly woo thing. And this was a good, 20 something years ago. There was no The Secret at this point. There was no, law of attraction at this point. But it did stay with me. And I realized eventually, I saw multiple times that he was right. It took a lot longer, though, to realize that I had to start being more proactive and paying attention to my desires sooner and being like, don't wait to see if this comes back around. See if you care about this enough now to do something now. But yeah, I was at a young, impressionable age, and that definitely stayed with me.
Well, I think it's so important. It goes back to something that I focus on, is that you have to say your dreams out loud, because if you're not going to be able to say them out loud, let alone even admit them to yourself, how are they going to come true? And so a question that I sometimes ask, which I'm going to now ask you, is what is that big dream of yours? Like, what is that dream that is hard to even admit to yourself, let alone say out loud, to bring it to fruition?
That's a good question. I've been doing, it's funny because on balance, I've been doing a lot of introspection lately, but then I took a bit of a break because I went on vacation. I took a long vacation, and now I've been kind of just catching back up. So I haven't given it, it's funny because it has not been one consistent thing, right? Which is why I'm like, I don't know, because it hasn't been one long held thing. I guess I would say, in a vague sense, without knowing exactly how it gets there, I know that I would love to have a business that helps people all over the world, that has multiple levels of, there's different ways to access to me, right? You can have like absolutely minimal access and just get like minimal help if that's all you need, or there's different ways, different levels of access, different packages, all that stuff. And I would say too, that in the long run, I want, some people say, I want to take over the world. I want a whole big empire. I don't really feel that need. I want to find, I want my people and I to find each other, right? The people who are a great fit. So I would eventually really love to have a business. I still would love to maintain a one-person business with a lot of help from contractors, freelancers, et cetera, but stay lean and mean, but have a business that that really helps my people and gives me the freedom that I want.
I love that. And the idea of this finding each other, not a forced, marketing campaign, and not just sitting back and hoping someone shows up on your doorstep looking for breath work, but really finding the right people who are focused on the same intention.
I've thought a lot lately, and I'm not even sure why, but over the past few months, I've been thinking about, what is culture and what does it take to create culture? And it's a kind of esoteric question, but culture really permeates every single thing we do every day, right? It dictates why the 6 a.m. workout class feels different than the 7 a.m. class, based on the people. It explains why, based on the behavior of others, you're going to let the guy in traffic or not. It really is everywhere. Culture is everything.
I love this idea of culture because I think the way that we show up in the world is going to attract people that are like-minded. And I think for me personally right now, I'm going through a transition of trying to figure out, leaving corporate America and coaching and the podcast and all of these things, but also realizing that there's no love lost with friendships, but I'm in a different place than I was maybe 10 years ago. And so in the same respect as whether or not you're going to let someone in traffic, it's kind of the same idea with your business or your friendships of, are you aligned? Do you have the same ideology and ideas for where you want to go and what you're working on? And also creating this space to understand other people and having that balance. So I love that you kind of brought up the example of traffic, but also the workout class, because I think they're both great examples of, if we can have more understanding in both of those situations, we may have a different experience culturally because we're opening the door to understand someone else.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And yeah, as I start to especially have this group program, we're working with groups, it's interesting to think, I think it takes minimally two people, one relationship is between two people, and that alone can have a culture. And if you add a third person in, that changes the culture. Each person ends up changing the culture to an extent, right? And then you start to get into mass groups, and it's like, the question evolves, right? There's so much more there. It really is. It's really a question far beyond the scope of the podcast. But yeah, as far as finding each other, I think that was what initially jogged my saying that is right. You want the right fit people because, regardless, sure, it's your program, you might be the coach, but the people that are there are going to help have a huge role in creating the culture. And you want it to be a culture that you enjoy spending time in. Otherwise, what's the point?
Absolutely. And part of me building culture is continuing to reciprocate both me asking questions and allowing guests to ask questions as well. So the final question is yours. You can ask me anything you'd like.
Well, it's funny because I had been thinking about that and I thought, I'm going to ask him how he defines culture. But I guess, we've already kind of been talking about that. What is the wildest, craziest, most memorable question someone has asked you in this segment of the podcast?
That is such a great question. I believe it was episode 18. I was speaking with Sven, who on TikTok, you may know him as the Badass Counselor. And the entire dynamic of the conversation was around family dynamics and relationships. And he was very direct and is a very direct person. And he asked me a question about my father. And I'm not going to phrase the question exactly right, but it was to the effect of, have you ever felt all of the hatred you have for your father? And he did ask like a 2 or 3 part question. But I think the reason that was so impactful was because in that current moment, I froze and I had a decision to make on how I was going to handle the question. And I think there's 2 things that really stood out to me. One, I have my own lived experience, and I don't need to inflict my opinion of my lived experience with my father or anyone else around me on anyone else. My goal with this podcast and sharing my story is to create a perspective of, this is my perception of what I went through. this is my lived experience. This is where I had difficulties. This is where I had success. This is the journey that I went on to heal. And it wasn't easy. And also, at the end of it, this is what it could look like on the other side. And whatever you're going through, it's worth putting one foot in front of the other. The other aspect of it that I think really stood out to me was that it's not always the things that we say that are important. For Sven, we did not go into a ton of detail about my life in the podcast per se. We talked about topics and I shared some examples, but he was able to put together an entire, very short question, but an entire story around the pieces that I laid out that enabled him to ask a question that was really specific to me and was difficult to answer, but also made me feel seen. And I think that is what I look at coaching with. When I focus on coaching, I want to ask that question that's going to make someone stop in their tracks. I want to ask that question that's going to inspire someone to think differently, identify that their voice changed, their tone changed, that something had shifted in the conversation, or there was a pattern that was repeating that over the course of several different shared experiences or shared story experiences, I was able to identify. And I think the more that we can go back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier with building culture, it's not just about finding the people that agree with you, that see things the same way. That is a component of it. It's also being able to have a conversation with someone that doesn't agree with you, that you can have differing opinions, but you don't have to put each other down in the process. And there was something about that specific question that I had the choice in that moment to lean into the negative or lean into that's in the past and I want to continue on my journey forward, but it's part of my story. And I chose the latter. And I'm very glad that I did, because I think the more we focus on the negativity of the past rather than how can we move forward together, whether it's a friendship where something happened and things are not working the way that they used to, you can still maintain a friendship. It's just a different level than it used to be. I think that's the point of all this. How do we stay connected and move forward, but understand that it's not always going to be at the same levels?
I love that. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Thank you. Well, thank you for joining me today. It was a pleasure to have you on. And I am definitely focused on breathing in this moment, but also it's something that I continue to work on. So I appreciate you sharing both the positive of bringing up your energy as well as the Band-Aid for a tougher moment.
Do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe or follow button, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. And if today's episode got you thinking, laughing, crying, or maybe even rolling your eyes, write a review and tap to rate. Now let's be real. This convo doesn't end here. Hit us up on socials and don't be shy. Slide into our DMs. We love to connect. Thanks for hanging with us today, and catch you on the next one, because our journey together is just getting started. Remember, stay curious, live authentically, and keep turtzing it up.